Lisa, thank you for coming back. We had you on a couple of weeks ago and talked about your career as a law enforcement officer with the Somerset County Prosecutor's Office. During that interview, one of the questions was, why did you decide to become a police officer? And your answer generally was that it was the result of being a victim of a crime. And I didn't follow up on that, and I didn't dig deeper. And in the conversation after the interview, come to find out you were open to sharing that information. So I wanted to have you back so we could talk a little bit about that, because I think it's an incredible story. So why did you decide to become a police officer?
So I went to Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York, and I studied communications with a concentration in public relations. And at the time of going into college, I thought I'd be some kind of high-level corporate executive, whether it be advertising, marketing, event planning, something. When I graduated college, I got a job at the Hudson Valley Mall, which is up near Marist College, as a marketing assistant. And it was one of the greatest jobs I ever had. I did International Food Court Night, I planned fashion shows. It was just a great experience. But it paid $13,000 a year, and I know, even though it's, ancient times ago, that was not enough to live on. And I was renting a studio basement apartment. I had a little tiny hot plate, a little tiny refrigerator. It was like knock 3 times to get in, down the back stairwell. It just wasn't a good living environment. So I decided I was going to pack up and I was going to live with my aunt, who was in Conshohocken, which is a suburb of Philadelphia, and figured I'll get a high-level corporate job in the city, right? That was my thought. So I moved in with her, and while I was interviewing in Philadelphia for that job, that ultimate job, I was working part-time as a photographer at the King of Prussia Mall. I don't know if you're familiar with the Philadelphia area, but King of Prussia is a very nice, relatively affluent area. And I was working as a photographer in a portrait studio inside the mall. And a lot of the older people will remember Expressly Portraits. I was one of those photographers. So I was working an afternoon shift at the mall, and it was during holiday time. So employees had to park in the very furthest parking lot. During my shift, I had done some Christmas shopping, so I was leaving my shift around 11 o'clock with bags in my hand. And I was walking towards my car, and I heard a man call to me. And I engaged, and he was asking me, he couldn't find his car. I'm asking him, where did you park it last? He's getting closer, and he's talking, and well, what color is it? And before I knew it, he had a gun in my stomach. He demanded my purse, and in my purse, I had mace, because mace was big at the time. I had my driver's license, and I had $5. In my whatever crazy thought, I wanted to get into my purse because I thought if I can get the mace that I can get away. He wasn't having it, a lot of curse words, ended up ripping the purse out of my hands. Luckily, I still had my car keys. When he left, I froze. I had that adrenal dump. I, basically was paralyzed in fear. I was the lucky one, though. Nothing else happened. He went away. I was able to get away safe with no harm. After it was all done and I could, regain some composure, I ran back into the portrait studio, told my employer, police came, took me down to the station, did the sketch, did the interview, the whole 9. I was able to get back into my car, and I drove from King of Prussia Mall to my family home in New Jersey, and I never set foot in the Philadelphia area for 2 years. The trauma that occurs after an event like that was so intense and so unexpected that it would be a long-term feeling. I found myself not going out with friends. I found myself Certainly not going to shopping malls, not going out at night, not answering the door. I found myself sleeping with a knife under my pillow. And the fear was that he had my driver's license, he was going to come back, he was going to kill me, kill my family. The stories that I was creating in my head. So about 6 months of that, and I decided I can't live like this. And I entered into a martial arts program. It was a mixed martial art at the time, karate, aikido, and jiu-jitsu. I ended up training. I ended up working for the school, teaching for the school, and ultimately getting a black belt. Now we're talking a few years after the event. You gotta go, all right, let me grow up because I can't do this working for a karate school for the rest of my life. What career can I marry my college degree and my martial arts experience? And when you think of law enforcement is 90% communication and 10% physical altercation. So it was really kind of like, let me give it a try. And I went in, and now we're at almost 28 years later. Did 25 years of law enforcement, and was able to create self-defense and empowerment seminars for community members throughout my whole career. So I was able to give back that experience in a positive way to various communities and organizations. So when I think back on why I went into law enforcement, I didn't know why at the time I was going into law enforcement until I realized why I was picked on that day to be the victim, have that experience so that I can give that back to the community.
So why do you think you were chosen to be the victim that day?
So a little bit more background about that time of my life, right? I just graduated college. I had no money. I was 50 pounds heavier. I was not in a really great relationship. Didn't have a really stable home, living with my aunt. So the vulnerabilities and the insecurities were pretty immense. Studies have shown that victims are chosen, and the number one reason why they're chosen is their body language. So my body language, based on all of my life experiences at that time, my shoulders were hunched, my chin was down, I was preoccupied with bags, my gait was very kind of staggered and slow. I didn't exude any kind of confidence, and I was alone, and I was a female, and I was in an opportunistic place. And along with that body language shouting, I can't take care of myself, I'm vulnerable, is why I believe I was picked on that day.
So when we go back to that night, you're walking to your vehicle, you hear somebody call out to you. As this is developing, was there ever an instance where you're like, something's not right, before that gun is shoved into your stomach?
No. I grew up with a great family, but we were always taught you help people, you respect people, you do what you can to be a good person in this world. So there was never a moment where I thought I didn't have to engage in that conversation. Nowadays, totally different story. I would never engage. I don't care what they think of me. I don't care if they think I'm not helpful. But back then, you're talking almost 30 years ago, it was, I want to be helpful and do the right thing. I had no situational awareness about me. I had no clue what was going on around me. My eyes were pointed at the ground, probably didn't even see that there was a person there. I think that if there was more awareness and I knew what threats were or could be, which is anything, that things would have gone differently.
Do you know if the offender was ever arrested?
Never found. My purse was found in the Philadelphia bus depot with the driver's license gone, the $5 gone, but the mace was still in there.
So what advice would you give someone that's at about that, how old were you, 22, 23?
Early 20s, yeah.
Early 20s. So for a young woman, I have a daughter that's going to be 22 in June. What kind of advice would you have for, and I guess not just for a young woman, but for me, it's for a young woman, my daughter, but for anyone out there?
Well, I mean, based on the studies, and Ted Bundy was interviewed, and he had said in an interview, televised interview, that he knew who his victim was going to be based on the tilt of her head, her facial expression, and her gait. So even just the minute little movements that we do in our body that shows insecurities and vulnerabilities, the first step in not becoming a victim is to not look like a victim. So what does that mean? What do we tell our recruits when they enter the police academy? Shoulders back, chest out, chin up, eyes forward, and walk with a purpose. Changing body language changes the messages that you are sending out. Make yourself bigger, hands on hips. Make yourself look like you know how to take care of yourself. That's first step. Obviously, there are other things people can do is learn how to defend themselves using leverage and angles. You're not using strength on strength. Most people who are going to be in an attack aren't going to win that by punching somebody out or kicking them in the groin. They're going to win that fight, that confrontation, by getting away, right?
So that's a great point. So what, and I don't want to speak for you, but what's the end goal of the self-defense tactics that you teach? Is it to kick somebody's ass? Is it to, get them in a compliance hold and, call the police with the other hand? What's your goal and what?
So the end goal is to get away, right? You don't want, if it requires some kind of strike, fine. If you're in a hold, there are ways to create a base, use an angle, use leverage. If somebody's holding on to you, you go into the weakest point, your strength is into your body. You want to, create an angle behind the person, however you're being attacked, right? There's 1,000 different ways we can talk about it. But basically, you're looking to create enough leverage and angle that you have enough space to get away, right? But the first step really is to not get yourself in that position.
Sure. Right?
So having the situation awareness, understanding that everything can be a threat, visualizing the what ifs. So what would I do if that person attacked me? And start thinking about it all the time. Every time somebody walks out of their house, walks into their house, walks out of their job, into a mall, out of a mall, at a stoplight. How many people in a sketchy area get to a stoplight and maybe somebody's selling flowers or looking, begging for money, and it's a red light? In the summertime, what do? Right? If our window's down, we put our window back up. We're visualizing the what if this person is going to create harm to me. So it's really about using that tactic in everyday life, knowing that everything can be a threat. So if, somebody walked into the door, what would I do? Kind of that cop mentality where we sit in a restaurant where we have that whole entire view of the restaurant so we can see everything that's going on. What are we doing? We're thinking about, what would I do if there was a altercation at this table? What would I do if my family's with me and I gotta go, pull my gun out and take care of business? We need to always visualize, and as law enforcement officers, we do that. But as civilians, they don't know how. So that is also an important step in the awareness part of it, so that they don't become that victim. They don't get themselves into that situation.
So when we talk about, and this is kind of going down a path that I didn't expect, but I want to talk about, because my daughter's going to watch this. So I want her to be able to walk away with something from watching this. So when you teach someone how to not be a victim and to avoid those situations, and then in that rare instance when they do become a victim, how to fight and create that opportunity to separate and get away, how long does it take you to teach something like that? I mean, are we talking 40 hours, 80 hours, once a week for a year? Or is it something that you can provide that base within 8 hours of training?
So as law enforcement, it all makes sense to us. It's almost simple, stupid, right? Common sense for us. For people not in law enforcement, it's their aha moments. That could be a 2-hour seminar, right? For them to just understand how body language affects their world and what's going to happen in their world. Their lack of awareness. Nowadays, everybody's on their phone. There was an incident in a city town near me where a woman is walking down the street at 3 o'clock in the morning with her earbuds in, looking at her cell phone, and there's a man less than 3 feet behind her, and she was completely unaware that he was there. And he ended up putting her into a chokehold from behind. She got away using her voice, which is also a weapon, right? And most women don't know how to use their voice. You know, they maybe have had dreams where they can't, yell in a dream, or they've had experiences through life where they've never given an opportunity to yell, and how to yell properly, right? You yell from the diaphragm, you don't yell from the throat. So teaching them stuff like that, using common sense, the gut feeling. So what is a gut feeling? It's that heat that rises through your body. It's the little tinglies that you get with your hair standing up. It's the increased heart rate, increased respiration, the sweat, the butterflies in the stomach, that feeling of nauseousness. In every seminar that I've done over the last 30 years, I have asked every person, have you ever felt a gut feeling? And every single person has said yes. There's not one person I've come across that hasn't felt a gut feeling. But when you ask them, how many have you ever not listened to your gut? Half the people will say yes. So everybody's felt what that gut feeling is, but majority of people don't act on it, right? So they don't change their decision making. They don't use that common sense to get out of that feeling. They'll go into it anyway.
So that's what I want to ask you. So what is the recommendation that you give people that if you experience that gut feeling, what's that course of action that you recommend for them? Yeah,
it's trusting it, right? Making decisions that will allow you to veer from the potential threat, right? Because we know that if we're feeling something's not right and we keep going towards it, well, then we're probably walking into danger. We feel that gut feeling and we make another decision to go a different avenue or a different, whatever situation we're in, well, then that gut feeling goes away, right? It tends to subside. So we know we're in a safe zone. So, all of it in a nutshell is, understanding your own body language, changing it so that it exudes confidence. And what that means is shoulders back, chest out, chin up, eyes forward, walking with a purpose. Understanding situational awareness and what it truly means, right? It doesn't mean that I'm just looking around. It means that I'm actually aware of what's going on and I'm recognizing everything around me. I'm looking for what could be a threat, and nowadays anything can be a threat. So you're then trying to visualize, well, if that person who's walking towards me became a threat, what would I do? So now you're creating scenarios in your mind so that in times of stress, that adrenal dump that we get in our bodies that's caused by extreme stress, our mind is more likely to think through it because we've already been practicing that thought process.
So what about the people that say, yeah, I got that gut feeling and I ignored it? Do they ever give you feedback on why they ignored it?
So the younger crowd tends to give me the peer pressure was the reason why. Sometimes the older will say my friends said everything is going to be okay, so, I just went with it anyway. Some people didn't have an answer, Why? Because they've never been asked. Never thought that it was that important to understand and recognize. So yeah, it's either they don't know or they thought nothing of it, that everything will be okay, or their friends were, it'll be fine.
What about the person that their mindset is, well, I don't want someone to think X of me, whether it's, I don't want someone to think that I'm rude, that I'm an ass, that I'm prejudiced, that I'm racist, that I'm, chicken shit, whatever it is, that I don't want someone to think ill of me. What do you tell those people?
Yeah, it doesn't matter. Get over it. Because you don't have any obligation to anyone in this world other than yourself to engage, right? Or to take care of. If children, there's a different obligation. Mm-hmm. But in the world that as it is today, for people basically to be given permission, right? It's okay if they think you're a jerk. It's okay if you don't help them. It's not on you. It's not your fault, and if there's a feeling of danger, you're making the right decision. Different scenarios, different answer for that question. They could be, I'm not saying that everybody shouldn't help people, but when you should and when you shouldn't, usually. In the last episode, I talked about how my son grew up thinking everybody was a pedophile. Well, because I told him, it gave him permission. You do not have to go over and say hello. You do not have to go over and pet the dog. As a child, you do not have to take the cookie from the strange man. It's allowing people to know that it's okay. And who cares what people think of you? It's the same thing when I do my classes. And the first time we do a pushback, we've been doing it since we were toddlers, right? It's easy. We do the pushback more for the empowerment part because they're able to use their voice and push somebody off their feet. Every single time in my women and teens classes, sorry, right? Everybody feels bad and they don't want to hurt anybody. I get that in a class, in a community environment, but we talk about it and we debrief about how it's okay if you are in a life or death situation to hurt somebody. And you have to actually make your mindset that and visualize that you could actually hurt somebody if you needed to. Because otherwise you're not, because you're going to feel bad. And there's no reason that you should feel bad if somebody's trying to hurt you.
So make yourself bigger. Be aware of your surroundings, identify potential threats, and respond to those. If you get that feeling, respond appropriately, move away from that threat, create distance, and use your voice. So let's talk about use your voice. How do you teach someone where to get that voice from, right? Not your throat, from down here. How do you teach someone to do that? And what do you teach them to say? Because you hear different don't yell for help because nobody pays attention to help. Yell fire because that tends to draw. So talk about that.
And I tell them they can say anything, right? And I do get that question asked, what should I say? Should I say fire? Should I say help? And when we yell a one word, we tend to go, what'd they say? Right? So I would recommend something that is a little bit longer or more profound so that people can hear that something else is coming, right? It's preparatory commands, like when you're in drill, right? You do preparatory and then you do the command. From the academy days, and any recruits that might be watching this, I tell my students to say get back, right? Because the get is the preparatory, the back is the command. It's easy to say. It comes from the gut very easily. It's more than one word. And even though they can say anything that they want, if somebody is learning how to yell from that gut, which most people don't know how to do unless they sing or they've been in, a military type situation, start to fear, what am I going to say? So they're not focused on learning how to yell. They're more focused on, well, what should I say? Mm-hmm. So I give them to say, get back. We talk about the diaphragm and the warrior, that warrior within, and tapping into it and feeling that energy coming from the diaphragm right out up through the lungs. And then I have them visualize being a bear and roaring out of their mouth. So giving people visualization analogies helps them to see and understand through different senses what the action should be.
So where are you at on personal defense tools? So you talked about how you carried mace. You've seen these, I think they're called cat ears, you put your knuckles in and they're very hard plastic, pointed. You got those little Kubotan things that you put on a key. Where are you on having some intermediate tools to defend yourself? What is your recommendation, if any?
So if you train with it and you're proficient with it, have at it. But how many people that you know that aren't in law enforcement have mace or tasers or firearms and they don't train with them? Mm-hmm. Right? So, somebody who has mace on their keychain, because I always get that, right? And then when I'm jogging, I have mace and if somebody comes at me, I'm just going to spray them. Well, have you ever sprayed that before? Do you know where to aim? Have you actually practiced it? Have you tried it in the wind and know which direction that it might come back at? Do you, what happens if you miss? How many shots do you have in that mace? So it's understanding the tool and the weapon, and having practiced it enough that you're proficient, that under stress, because what happens when we have that adrenal dump under stress, we lose our fine motor skills. We lose our gross motor skills. Are you proficient enough to use it in that time of stress?
So proficiency is the key to enter any, intermediate or deadly force tools. If you're going to have it, practice with it. Otherwise, you're potentially introducing a weapon into the situation that wasn't there before. Right? And they could be used against you. So we've moved through that step. So let's talk a little bit about the physical training. So you do some physical training with your students. Mm-hmm. Generally speaking, how much time do you spend with your students in that? And I'm assuming it's very basic stuff based on the fact that the goal is to create separation so you can get away.
So I've been training Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for the last 11 years, and that is more of the focus than that mixed martial art that I had back in the 90s. So it's really about allowing yourself to understand your movements and other people's movements and how you can benefit from their movement. The self-defense that I teach is very, very basic. It's how do you get out of a wrist grab? How do you get out of a rear choke? What if somebody comes and charges at you? What if somebody's grabbing onto your shirt about to punch you? Form of the very likely kinds of attacks. And giving them just enough steps using that concept of leverage, being in close, creating angles, and the ultimate goal to get away, that it's simple enough that they can use it, understand it, and not necessarily have to practice it because it's just that simple. But I always tell them, if you want to be really proficient and know what happens if it doesn't work, or you make a mistake, or you get taken in a different position, then you need to start training.
So we didn't talk about this at all, but we've gone through, I guess, the responses at each step of becoming closer to being a victim of your response options. Someone who has been victimized, you were victimized, you experienced it, do you have, and again, we didn't talk about this, so I apologize catching you off guard, but do you have any recommendations for them on how you coped with it after being victimized? I realize everybody handles it differently, but what can they do to cope with being victimized?
So I didn't know what I was doing to cope until many years into it, and then I realized that that's what I did to cope. And back then, therapy wasn't really a big thing. Mm-hmm. Right today, I would say people should be in some kind of therapy session. But what I did was enter into a martial arts program. I allowed my outlets to become physical. I was 50 pounds overweight. I went from being that to, over the years, being awarded a pro card in a bodybuilding competition. So I took all of that trauma and that experience and all the negative and turned it into positives. And how can I make myself a better person? How can I use this as fuel? I did Spartans, I did Tough Mudders, I did barbell competitions, I did full marathons, half marathons, triathlons. I did 1,002 burpees. I trained clients. I got a master's degree. I did all these things to better myself, but it was more fuel from that original fire that kept me burning in desire to make me a better person.
So that may have been it, but I'm still going to ask, because I always ask, do you have any last words of advice for someone that's watching this video on this particular topic?
I do believe that some of the worst things in our lives can actually be the best things in our life. And it's about how we perceive them. And it's about how we use them to be better in our life, right? So when I tell people about being held at gunpoint, a lot of people say, "Oh, I'm so sorry that happened to you." And I say, no. If that didn't happen to me, I wouldn't be where I am, and I wouldn't have done all of the things that I did, and I wouldn't have been on the path that I was chosen for and have all the accomplishments. So, at my retirement party, I actually thanked, one of the first people I thanked when I was giving my speech was the piece of shit who held me at gunpoint, because if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't have been where I am today.
Lisa, I want to thank you again for, I guess, sharing what was the first step in your journey with the badge. So thank you.
Thank you.